Mr. Tharoor, good evening and thank you for giving us your time. I first want to talk about the RTI amendment bill that came up for discussion, has been passed by Lok Sabha and will be introduced in the Rajya Sabha for discussion. You've spoken up against it. Is there a reason why you believe that this bill would be detrimental to the powers of the citizen?
Absolutely fundamental, Faye, because the RTI, as you know, has been one of the monumental achievements of our democracy. It's actually allowed ordinary citizens to ask the government for information that in the past was very difficult to elicit from the authorities about government expenditures, about the government appointments or non-appointments, all sorts of things. And as a result, 60 lakh Indian citizens have taken advantage of the RTI, which has produced a lot of transparency into our system and enhanced the accountability of our representatives and our officials to the ordinary citizens of our country. It's been extraordinary and transformative. And as you know, sometimes the stakes are very high. As many as 80 RTI activists have been murdered in the course of pursuing justice through the RTI. So it's been an amazingly transformational piece of legislation, and the centerpiece of it has been a completely independent and autonomous information commission that can challenge the authorities without fear or favor, demand information that the authorities don't want to give, and can even punish errant officials for delaying in giving the information that they've been asked for. So it's been a terrific institution as well as a law in terms of deepening our democracy. But what's happened is that this government has, first of all, tried to delay in every possible way the process of information gathering by not filling up vacancies in the information commissions at centre or in the states. Yes. In fact, at the Central Information Commission last year, of the 11 commissioner posts, only 3 were filled. And the Supreme Court had to pass rather severe strictures before the government stirred itself to hire a few more commissioners. Even today, there are 4 vacancies out of the 11. As a result of not enough commissioners and not enough staff, the result is there are 32,000 cases pending. And of those, 9,500 are cases pending for more than 1 year. So let's have no doubt, Faye, this is not a government that really wanted to see the RTI applied against it. They wanted to do their very best to ensure that the RTI was toothless. This is the final nail in the RTI's coffin, this law, this amendment. They claim it is merely temporary,
yes.
Even the bigger part, merely technical and routine, yes. But it's anything but. Because the heart of the independence of any institution is when that institution is truly insulated in terms of its tenure of office and its salary. By law, the existing RTI Act of 2005 gives them 5 years, subject to retirement age of 65, and gives them a salary equivalent to Supreme Court judges. Fine. It's a fixed thing, and no one can do, no government can tamper with it. This government is now removing the right to have a salary fixed by the Supreme Court, is also determining that both the salary and the tenure will essentially be at the whims, or as the law says, at the discretion of the central government. Now, once you hire people for as long as you like, fire them when you want, pay them what you wish or don't pay them, then inevitably he who pays the piper calls the tune. And the idea is to ensure the subservience of the commissioners. They're going to change this powerful independent body into what is merely another department of the central government. Mr. Tharoor. It's truly a national disgrace.
Mr. Tharoor, very quickly, do you believe that the numbers in the Rajya Sabha will allow the RTI amendment to pass through, or is it likely to face trouble, in your opinion?
We can't be sure because, unfortunately, there are some parties that are neither formally allied with us nor with the NDA whose voting behavior could tilt the balance. For the most part, some of these people, in order to curry favor with the central government, have tended to align with the NDA on crucial votes. Yes. And if that happens, I'm afraid we could lose the RTI. And I think that would be a very major setback for the Indian people.
Yes.
It would be for the Indian people a big loss, and I hope the Indian citizenry will rise up and say, protect our rights, because it's our rights that are really on the anvil here.
And you brought up democracy right now and the nature of protest and dissent under this current government. There's been a letter that was written by 49 artists and authors to the Prime Minister today, talking about the problem with lynching, the problem with dealing with dissent or crushing dissent, and among other things that seem to have caught the attention of the general public and the media is the quote about the fact that the phrase or the slogan Jai Shri Rama is being used as a war cry, and this must be stopped immediately because it's being used to target Muslims, Dalits and minorities. Now, the view here is that fingers are being pointed at Hindus as perpetrators of these crimes or crimes of this nature. And because you've spoken extensively about being Hindu and you've also written a book about it, do you see this or do you agree with that point of view that this letter in some way points fingers at the Hindu community as being perpetrators of crime at this point?
On the contrary, I think, in fact, the letter points the fingers at miscreants who are misusing the name of the Hindu community to act in a way that is profoundly un-Hindu. I am a proud Hindu, Faye, and my faith does not teach me to impose my wishes, my desires, or my religion, or my ways of religious practice on anybody else. Even within Hinduism, there is such diversity of worship. You can actually disbelieve in the worship of Ram and still call yourself a Hindu. There are many parts of India, for example, where Lord Ram's journey from Ayodhya to Sri Lanka didn't cross, where there is no tradition of Ram temples. There are many places in which different gods and goddesses are worshipped in different spirits. And the truth of the matter is that to have even any sort of one slogan, whether it's Bharat Mata Ki Jai, whether it's Jai Shri Ram, whatever it may be, imposed upon the unwilling is simply not Hinduism. It is merely gunda behavior by miscreants misusing the name of a very accepting, eclectic and open faith. So I must say that those who claim that forcing others to say Jai Shri Ram who don't want to say it somehow advertises their Hindu-ness, they haven't understood the first thing about Hinduism.
Mr. Tharoor, also given your experience with the UN and with external affairs, you did make a comment about the fact that you believe Donald Trump hadn't been properly briefed about his statement of mediating between India and Pakistan. Do you stand by the fact that you think it's absolutely unthinkable that anyone from India's team would even suggest such a thing?
Absolutely unthinkable, but at the same time, absolutely imperative for the Prime Minister to clarify that himself. The fact is, Faye, President Trump has cited a personal conversation with Prime Minister Narendra Modi using his name. That makes it incumbent upon him to clarify what he said or didn't say. It's entirely possible there was a misunderstanding. It was entirely possible that, as a fellow politician put it, that President Trump was talking through his hat. Who knows? The fact is that we have Mr. Trump's word for what he claims the other party said, and all we have from Mr. Modi is silence and sheltering behind ministers who are repeating the standard party line on Kashmir, which has been our line since at least 1972. Now, that we don't need to hear from Mr. Jaishankar. We know what it is. We also have been saying these things when we were in government. What we want to know from Mr. Modi is an assurance to the parliament of which he is a member and to which he is accountable, let's not forget, that I'm sorry, I didn't say this. There must be a misunderstanding. Even that
but Mr. Tharoor, let's be honest about the fact.
But when he doesn't say that he didn't say it.
Let's be honest about the fact that while he's the President of the United States, Donald Trump has been known to say outrageous things and be very, perhaps sparsely or not inadequately briefed on several matters, especially when it comes to global affairs. Is it necessary then that we insist our Prime Minister clear up everything that Donald Trump chooses to say on any particular day? He isn't a man known to be careful with his words.
Say we learned this principle from the precedent set by the BJP. In 2009, They paralyzed the Lok Sabha for 2.5 days, demanding that the Prime Minister explain the statement in Sharm el-Sheikh. And their argument was precisely that since the Prime Minister was involved, no one less than the Prime Minister could clarify, and the Foreign Minister's clarification was not enough. So being UPA, being Congress, being Manmohan Singh, Dr. Manmohan Singh came and clarified. But in the case of this particular government, what they can demand when they're in opposition, they're not prepared to concede when they're in power. So now they're saying it's enough for Mr. Jaishankar to speak, to which my answer is, I personally don't believe Mr. Trump is right. I personally am inclined to believe that no Indian Prime Minister would ever say such a thing. But because he has been cited personally, the Prime Minister owes it to himself as well as to the nation, and certainly to Parliament, to clarify in his own words that he didn't say this. Let me stress, Faye, that on this one, it's not just a question of pointing fingers or assigning blame. It is more a question of responsibility, parliamentary responsibility. There is a well-standing, long-standing tradition in the House. So when a foreign leader meets our Prime Minister, then when Parliament resumes, this is when Parliament's not in session, then when Parliament resumes, a briefing is normally given to Parliament about what transpired, the principal headlines. It's usually fairly anodyne because the newspapers have already given us the full story. But this is not something that was in the newspaper. This is something in a personal conversation between two individuals. Only one individual is in a position to clarify, the person who can say, I said this or I didn't say it. And the honest truth about this is, as long as he doesn't do so, he leaves a very worrying ambiguity over what ought to be settled Indian policy. That's why I said I think it's unthinkable that he would say it.
So, but if I may also ask a question, simply to understand,
I think
simply to understand the stakes from an external, affairs point of view. If our Prime Minister does, and when our Prime Minister does come forward and say, I didn't say this, effectively, what would that mean for the relationship between the USA and India? Because we're effectively calling Donald Trump a liar. But is he used to that by now?
No, but our Ministry of External Affairs has already issued a statement saying that the Prime Minister didn't say this. The Minister has stood up in both houses and said the Prime Minister didn't say this. Our question is only, why can't the Prime Minister clarify that he didn't say it? Ultimately, the government of India has told the government of the US that their head of government or head of state misspoke. That's now very clear and already on the record. All we want is for the person who was cited to absolve himself. And where is parliamentary accountability, Faye? Is our Prime Minister now deciding that he's above Parliament? It's a long cry, far cry from the days in which Jawaharlal Nehru attended every single day of a Parliament session. Mr. Modi has bothered to get himself elected but never shows up. He's hardly ever in Parliament. It's just one-way traffic. He comes, makes a speech and goes away, and that too not very often. I think this is high time that he showed some respect for the institution whose ground he kissed when he first stepped on the steps of Parliament.
I want to slip in
of the MPs, or at least answer questions that have already been asked.
I want to slip in one more question, and this is purely as a citizen. We've spent the last 3 weeks tracking what's going on in Karnataka, and last night the Karnataka government fell and is likely to be replaced, we understand, with a BJP government in Karnataka. Today, Mr. Kamal Nath apparently has whisked off 2 MLAs of the BJP in Madhya Pradesh to an undisclosed location. Now, I'm not asking whether it's the Congress or the BJP who's doing it and who's not doing it, but don't you believe that the citizens of this country deserve better than politicians who are constantly switching sides, or parties that are constantly kidnapping people and taking them to undisclosed locations?
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm 100% in agree with you. This entire thing is a travesty of democracy and a disgrace to the way in which we practice it. That people who have been elected on a set of principles, a political platform, a political party's logo, a political set of convictions that presumably they must have repeated ad nauseum in their speeches to get elected, can so blithely toss aside and ignore everything they've said and ostensibly believed in and stood for all their working lives, to just change allegiance because of a certain lure. I must say a lure of lucre, because everyone has been talking quite openly about the specific amounts that a defection will earn the defector some of these recent defections. And as you know, Karnataka is not the only one. We've had 4 out of 6 Telugu Desam Rajya Sabha MPs being brought over to the BJP. We've had cases in pretty much every state, and even no less a person than the Prime Minister himself says cheerfully that 40 Trinamool MLAs are waiting to switch over to his side. I mean, is this what our politics is going to be all about? To me, it convinces me in my old belief that the parliamentary system is unsuited to our nature, because the whole idea of actually forming an executive through electing a legislature, it makes no sense in theory, and it makes even less sense in practice, least of all in a country like India, where loyalties and bidding are up for sale, because when a legislator crosses, a government rises or falls. I think government should be elected independently and should be accountable to the voters who elected them, and legislators should be elected to legislate, not to form the government. I think this is a great flaw in our system that I've been arguing against, and I intend to write this once again for further consideration, because this kind of horse trading, or as I called it on Twitter a couple of days ago, cattle auction, is simply not worthy of the great democracy that our founding fathers and mothers thought they established.
All right, Mr. Tharoor, many thanks for joining us. Shashi Tharoor there giving us his point of view on various subjects, most importantly, of course, the subject of Karnataka. And speaking of Karnataka, the stage is set for B.S. Yeddyurappa to be the next Chief Minister of Karnataka. B.S. Yeddyurappa will stake claim to form the government after meeting BJP High Command in New Delhi. Meanwhile, the Congress JDS held several meetings through the day to discuss the future of that alliance. And in an exclusive interview to Mirror Now, the caretaker Chief Minister of Karnataka, Kumaraswamy, dropped a big hint about the future of that coalition. He was speaking to my colleague, Amita Balachandra. Take a look.
Today we are called our MLAs to work out future strategies. Our top priority is to develop our party, to get the confidence of the people of Karnataka. How do we have to move at this juncture? We will going to...
No, but will you stay with the coalition?
Let us see. I don't know.
Are you also afraid?
What Congress leaders, their stand, I don't know. Future days. News media regularly, they are, whatever they wanted to create in the public, confusions, still they are continuing their process, media friends. I don't know, we have not discussed anything.
No, but are you afraid of horse trading, sir? More horse trading?
It's already over chapter. That chapter is closed now.
Amita Balachandra joins us right now live on the show. Amita, thanks for joining us. Obviously, there have been reports, especially from this conversation that you've had with Kumaraswamy, that the alliance between the Congress JDS might not survive this latest blow. And we know that it was an extremely unnatural alliance. It was an alliance that suffered a great deal during the general elections as well, and after that, post the results. What are you picking up right now from the Congress party? Have any of them made statements about the alliance so far?
Well, as far as the Congress party is concerned, they haven't made any statement whatsoever. There was a party meet in the afternoon where senior Congress leaders like D.K. Shivakumar, Parmeshwar and even Dinesh Gundura were present, but they haven't made any statements whatsoever on the alliance. But the JDS held, a press meet in the afternoon. They also had a party meet in the morning where they met MLAs and Deve Gowda, the former Prime Minister, also spoke to the press saying that they don't have any problems whatsoever with the Congress party, that they do not regret having an alliance with them, and that they will have to now see what the Congress party says, that they will have to have discussions and let the media speculate is what they're saying. So as of now, they seem to say that there is no problem with the alliance. What's going to happen going forward is something for the discussions that need to take place first.
Also, Amita, what is the status right now in the city of Bangalore? I know citizens are personally relieved that all of this politics is over, but how soon is it likely to be before a new government is sworn in?
Well, the information that we picked up today is, as far as the BJP is concerned, they're waiting for more clarity on whether the rebel MLAs will be disqualified or not. And that is information we just picked up. Our Ashok, a senior BJP leader, is in Delhi at this point. There will be a parliamentary board meeting wherein an observer will come to Bengaluru for the legislative party meeting here and then, help for the government. But before that, they need more clarity on whether the MLAs will be disqualified or not, and whether they can get up the numbers, because Yeddyurappa has mentioned previously as well that he welcomes the rebel MLAs. So far, there is no word that's come in from the rebel MLAs itself on whether they will join the BJP or not. So there needs to be more clarity on whether they will be disqualified, and they're likely to wait for that to happen.
All right, Amitabh, thanks for that update. Of course, for the citizens of Karnataka, the quicker a new government comes in and starts working, the better it will be for everyone. Amitabh Balchandra bringing us that update from Bangalore. Moving on to our next conversation, as we wait for the Karnataka government to be formed, the RTI Amendment Bill 2019 is set to be introduced in the Rajya Sabha after it was passed in Lok Sabha 2 days ago. And there's been a lot of criticism from opposition parties, as you heard Shashi Tharoor argue not long ago on this show. The bill introduces changes in terms and conditions of the appointment of the Chief Information Commissioner at the centre, the Information Commissioners at the state. Now, just to put this aside as simply as I possibly can, the RTI gives you and me as citizens the ability to ask for any information in government. So any government office, you can write to that government office in your language of choice and ask for them to share official documents on what money has been spent, any decision that has been taken, any meeting that has been held. If it's an official government document, you have the right to look at it. Now, here's the thing. A lot of times, government officers don't want to share this sort of information. They write back giving you some reason or the other as to why they can't share the information. That's when we go to an information commissioner, or for the country, there's a chief information commissioner. They're like judges. And we can go to them and tell them that we've written to the government office and who have not given us information. The information commissioners will then or can then send notices to government offices that have to be followed, because the information commissioner has the status of a Supreme Court judge. They send notices to government offices that have to be followed. They can even ask for extra information if they choose. Now, this is where it is. The Information Commissioner has a fixed tenure of 5 years and a fixed salary that moves alongside the salary of the Supreme Court judges. This particular amendment removes that fixed tenure and leaves it to the discretion of the Government of India. It also says their salaries have been altered and the government will decide what their salaries will be. Effectively, you are taking an individual who is meant to be independent and meant to have the authority and the spine to stand up to the government, and you're deciding what that individual will make as a salary and how long that individual can stay in office. There's no clarity even on what the new term will be. What does this do effectively? It makes RTI commissioners subservient to the government. The one thing that we don't want. And as citizens, this should be raising alarm bells all over the place. This is not good for us. Joining me on this conversation, Sridhar Acharyulu is the former Information Commissioner, Dinakar Lanka spokesperson with the BJP. Mr. Lanka is with us right now. Mr. Lanka, I want you to respond to criticism, and I'll be very honest, criticism that quite frankly I agree with at this point, that the government is trying to dilute the RTI Act. Why is the government diluting the RTI Act?
No, D'Souza, government is not diluting. The appointment, existing system, whatever it is continuing. As far as the remuneration and tenure is concerned, there are certain inconsistencies was happened at the time when original RTI Act was passed. Let you observe that, for example, the Chief Information Commissioner position is on par with the Supreme Court judge. But the orders issued by the Chief Information Commission can be a challenge in High Court. These kind of the things, already inconsistencies are in existence. Keeping view of those inconsistencies, this government want to make much more transparent way, for which these amendments has recommended. But the amendments regarding to the remuneration and the tenure may not be effect on the eminence of the RTI commissioners, because their character, conduct, honesty shall not be connected with remuneration and tenure, because they are eminent people as per the procedure. If they are going to be appointed.
Okay. Let me offer you a
It was
rebuttal.
appointment which happened previously with the President of India, and same thing is going to be happened in similar way. There is no change in appointments as well as their functionality and the applicability of the RTI Act.
All right. Mr. Lanka, your first point was, you said that because there were inconsistencies, the fact that a commissioner or information commissioner's order can be challenged in High Court, there was an inconsistency that needed to be corrected. Do you also realize that a decision made by a chief minister, the prime minister, or a president of India can be challenged in High Court before it goes to Supreme Court? That argument actually doesn't hold. We are not talking about whether or not their decisions can be challenged in court. Anybody's decision can be challenged in court. That's our judicial system. We're talking about reducing their eminence in the system so that more and more government officers will feel like they can not follow orders and will feel like they can thumb their noses to an order from a commissioner, which is already happening. Secondly, you did talk about the fact that you don't believe a change in the tenure or the remuneration will affect their honesty. We're not talking about the honesty. We're talking about the fact that the government has not given us clarity as to what that change is. So if you're removing the 5-year term, is it a 3-year term? Is it a 2-year term? Is it a 6-month term? Why won't you tell us? Because you want the discretion to actually end the term of a commissioner who you feel is a bother to you, who's asking too many questions, who's passing too many orders in your direction. Why haven't you told us what the new term is? Why is this lack of clarity? Why haven't you asked for public consultation on this bill before you passed it, rammed it through Lok Sabha? Where is the public consultation?
Yeah.
Where's the clarity?
D'souza, yes, it is. I will come to the. When original bill itself is passed, we have taken personal, legal, and all other whatever the process which required at the time when the original bill was passed in the year 2005. There are only 2 provisions regarding to the remuneration and tenure which is not affecting adversely functionality of the RTI. There is no question of any kind of procedural change. There is no question of any kind of applicability of RTI. There is no amendments in respect of those.
May I know who is
so there is no direct connectivity as far as tenure and remuneration is concerned in their function exercise as well as their rights and obligations are concerned. So
let's ask
it is not unnatural contention which is making by the opposition.
All right. Mr. Sridhar Acharyalu joins us right now. He's the former Information Commissioner. Mr. Acharyalu, Dinakar Lanka, spokesperson of the BJP, was just making his argument as why he believes this is not a problem. So here are his points. He believes all due process has been followed. He has also said that he doesn't believe remuneration and tenure changes will affect the honesty or the independence of the commissioners or the information commissioners. And he also argued that the government is in no way diluting the RTI Act. Go ahead. Your argument, Mr. Acharyalu.
See, honesty is not the question. Nobody is doubting anybody's honesty or dishonesty. No, that is not the question at all. And you can't impose honesty by changes in law. Honesty is something very personal and it relates to character. And coming to the next point, that is independence. Now, independence arises out of certainty of term and difficulty in removal of the person who gave an adverse order or an order which is inconvenient to the government. So that is where lies independence. So the Supreme Court judge can give an adverse order and continue until his retirement, nobody can touch. Similarly, not exactly in the same manner, but Information Commissioner was also given a 5-year term, which during which he cannot be touched or there cannot be any problem for him. 5-year term is a certainty. Now, what is the term that they are going to give? Nobody knows. No, you just now raised that issue. Uncertainty. From certainty, we are traveling to uncertainty. And what kind of uncertainty? Whenever there is a new recruitment of or filling of vacancies of information commissions, you go on prescribing. And what is that you are going to prescribe? Nobody knows. So there is a secrecy around the Amendment to Right to Information Act. First of all, they don't consult anybody. First of all, they don't explain the need. In fact, there is no need for consultation because there is no need for amendment at all. Commission is doing properly. Only thing required is you fill up the vacancies in time and appoint commissioners from all the walks of life which are mentioned in the Right to Information Act, not only from bureaucracy, and then you see how it works. And it has shown its power for all these 13 years. It has brought out a lot of corruption. It was helping the real good administrators to make good administration. No, I just do not see any reason for this amendment. There is no compelling reason. There is no discussion. They did not tell what exactly they are going to do. So there is a huge secrecy around it, and it will seriously affect the autonomy, independence of the Information Commission. And tomorrow, I don't know whether it will be on the level of Joint Secretary or Deputy Secretary or a supervisor of an office. We don't know.
Right.
Now,
So actually,
after a much deliberation in 2005,
let me
even
just
after the Parliamentary Standing Committee has made a fantastic consideration and recommendation.
Actually, let me just break this down piece by piece. Mr. Lanka, there are very interesting questions. First of all, where is the Parliamentary Standing Committee to refer this bill to? In your second term, you haven't appointed a Parliamentary Standing Committee. Where is the due process that you're talking about? There is no standing committee to talk to. Second point, where is the clarity on the changes? You said remuneration and tenure, that this will not affect the honest people in any way. Let's assume that to be true. Why can't you tell us what the new remuneration and the new tenure will be? Why is there a lack of clarity?
D'Souza, let me clarify first that this is not new bill. It is existing act. Amendments are making in respect of two provisions. At the time of passing, please. At the time of passing the bill, due deliberations and everything happened. At the time, if you observe, 1 minute, sir, 1 minute, you can give your explanation after me. It is not new bill. It is amendment of the existing act. That is number one. Number two, at the time when the fixation of the remuneration in the original bill, it is very clear that the remuneration fixed for the Chief Information Commissioner on par with the Secretary, and commissioners are on par with the Deputy Secretaries. At the time, the members of the committee, the President of India, Ramnath Kovind ji, was the member. He was recommended very clearly at the time on par with Chief Election Officer remuneration for the Chief Information Commissioner, and election officers remuneration on par with Election Commission Officer remuneration for the commissioners. It was done, all the process at the time it was done. Due deliberations was done. It is just two provisions amendment. It is not at all directly any kind of connection in functionality of the RTI existing system. Appointments was not altered. Any kind of amendment made for appointments. Existing system is very much clearly following. As far as remuneration and tenure is concerned, such eminent personalities who are appointing as a RTI commissioners, they never ever influence under the tenure and the remuneration. I feel that their honesty, credibility and character based on the eminence only appointments are going to be taken place. If anybody feels that, 1 minute madam, when any statutory position is not permanent, whether it is a permanent statutory position is available in India for any department?
No, Mr. Lanka, okay. I will pass this back to Mr. Acharya to make his arguments, but I just want to ask you one thing. You are aware of the fact that the RTI Act specifies that when someone accepts a job as an information commissioner, and you said these are eminent people who have great standing in society, when they accept a job as an information commissioner, they are not allowed to have any other sources of income. They are not allowed to take up any other job or remuneration. Why or how can a person take up a job without knowing how much it pays and what the tenure is and what the details are? They will be at the mercy of the government, and that is exactly what you want. You want them to be at your mercy.
No, D'Souza. No.
What? No. Tell me how much you will pay them.
The order, the perks and the remuneration, everything will be there.
When? It's not there. Right now, you have passed a bill in Lok Sabha. The details are not there. So why should I wait? You've passed a bill in Lok Sabha without the details because you have a brute majority in Lok Sabha. How is that fair?
No, D'Souza, everything will be open in transparent manner only. It will be going to be completed. No question of any ambiguity in it. Very clearly it will be get open,
It's totally
and
ambiguous.
the inconsistencies which made in the year
Totally
2005
I'll
Act
tell
is
you what the
going to make
inconsistencies
amendments.
were. All right, let me bring in Mr. Acharilu. Let me also point out, according to Mr. Lanka, he keeps talking about the fact that there are inconsistencies in the current system. I'll tell you what the inconsistencies are. There are information commissioners who have the ability to stand up to the government and to send the government notices and to send the government orders. That is the inconsistency that they don't like right now. That is the problem that they're trying to fix. That is the issue that they want to be removed. They want these information commissioners to be functioning on the side of the government and not the side of the citizen. Go ahead, Mr. Acharilu. Where is the clarity? Where is the transparency?
It is functioning in the existing system only.
Mr. Sridhar Acharilu, go ahead.
I'd like to say, yeah. As on today, the Chief Election Commissioner is equivalent to Chief Election Commissioner, and other commissioners are on par with information commissioners. Now they know their term is 5 years or 65, whichever is earlier, 65 years of age. Now they are not subordinate to executive. They are not subordinate to any government that is working either at center or in the states. Now what will happen? They say that it was a mistake to give the same powers as CEC was given to him. They say that the Information Commissioner's performance or the duties are totally different from Election Commission. First, I will dispute that. The point is, the right of expression includes right of voting and right to speak. Right to speak requires right to information, and Supreme Court many a time explained that right to information is an integral part of, openly explained integral part of freedom of speech and expression, that is Article 19(1)(a). So right of expression, right to vote is also right of expression, that is also arising from Article 19(1)(a), and both are the constitutional rights. And the government is misrepresenting to the people that it is not a constitutional right. It is absolutely not correct. In 2005, the government itself said it is a constitutional right to implement the constitutional right of 19(1)(a), under which right to information has to be, mechanism has to be provided for its implementation. So we are making law for the entire country. Unless you say that you are making a law for entire country, you are making a law for enforcement of a constitutional right, you cannot make a law for entire country. So that is the plea they have taken. And what is the mistake in it? There is no mistake. And the government now says it is not a constitutional right. You please see, there are 3 Supreme Court judgments prior to 2005 and 3 Supreme Court judgments after 2005, that is the year in which Right to Information Act is passed. So they clearly stated that right to information is a constitutional right. So how can they say that the Central Information Commission is not a constitutional body? Constitutional body does not mean that body which is existent at the time of commencement of the Constitution. It means which is enforcing a constitutional right. A body is called constitutional body if it is enforcing a constitutional right. And I am enforcing a constitutional right as a commissioner. How can you say that I am not a constitutional body? So this is the basic mistake. And second mistake is they say it is not a constitutional right. Third mistake is it was done in a hurry. It was not done in a hurry. 10 years it was taken for drafting the Right to Information Act. And the deliberations were exhaustively made on the status of the commission. The Parliamentary Standing Committee under the chairmanship of Sudarshan and Achiyappa stated that it should be on par with Election Commission because their performance of their duties are similar. And how can government say that it is in mistake and made in a hurry? And now I am asking, this bill is coming in a hurry. There was no consultation. There is no Parliamentary Standing Committee. There is no demand for such an amendment. The government should come out and say, what is the compelling reason for the government to bring this amendment? What is the wrong? Why is that it is scared off? The government is totally scared of RTI. That's why they are killing the independence of the commission. Now, I'll tell you in one small example.
We have to allow Mr. Lanka to rebut. One second, Mr. Acharya.
Let me just... Madam, let me complete.
Okay,
Let me complete.
Okay. Go ahead.
Let me complete this. What I am trying to tell you is, a PIO cannot give information. First Appellate Authority cannot give information because he is a subordinate. The only recourse is Independent Information Commissioner. And if a person who wants to become a commissioner does not know what is his term, what is his status, whether he is equivalent to Deputy Secretary, Joint Secretary, or what is his status, if he is a Deputy Secretary, for example, can he give an order to the Cabinet Secretary for disclosure of information? He cannot. Then what is that they are doing? You do not say what is that you are going to prescribe. as may be prescribed is the only point that you are adding to.
D'Souza,
You have
absolutely
removed the
confusing.
certainty of the law and introducing
Absolutely
uncertainty,
confusing.
similar uncertainty, very very terrible uncertainty.
Okay, one second. I want to allow Mr. Lankar to respond. Yeah, one second. Gentlemen. This is a very important point. If you expect someone to be independent and do their job, that person needs to know that they have a clear term ahead without being dismissed, which is a right that the government has now withheld. Basically, when there is an IAS officer or an IPS officer or an IFS officer who stands up to politicians, they get transferred. In this case, an information commissioner cannot get transferred, cannot get dismissed. So what have you done? You've decided that you will keep an opaque term and you will end that person's term. We don't know what you have replaced the 5-year term with. You've not said, okay, 4 or 3 or 2. You have just left it to your own discretion. Tomorrow you will decide that, okay, whenever a government doesn't like an information commissioner's face, he can end his term. Why won't you give us clarity? I simply want clarity. In order to have this conversation, I need to know what the new term is.
I want to give clarity. Yeah, I want to give clarity. As far as the existing system is concerned, there is no amendment. The procedure, same as it is, it continues. The appointment, same as it is, it continues. Rights and responsibilities continues similar way in the existing system. As far as the tenure and remuneration is concerned, it is not directly impacting the functionality of the RTI commissioners. You are always trying to speak about against adversely on the independence and integrity of the eminent personality. I don't like to speak on those lines because the government want to clear all kind of inconsistencies which happened at the time of passing the bill.
Not the tenure,
definitely you can speak as per your wish, but it is not considered as publicly as I am not ready to accept as per your mindset, your thinking itself is the correct. I am not ready to accept it because my straight point I raised that on par with Supreme Court Judge, Chief Information Commission hold the position, whereas his order can be challenged by the High Court is not inconsistency.
No, hang on.
At least
Mr. Lankar, are you telling me I cannot go to the High Court with the order of the Chief Information Commissioner's order cannot be challenged in the High Court?
Also can be challenged before High Court.
I can't go to the High Court with an order of the Prime Minister.
Given the power.
Where is the inconsistency?
No. That is the different issues with this
Presidential
one.
order
Prime Minister is not equivalent to Supreme
Presidential
Court
order is
judge.
challenged
Is
in
there
Uttarakhand
any such
High
kind
Court.
of thing in the Constitution?
I'm telling you, everybody's orders can be challenged in the High Court. Mr.
Definitely.
Lankar, you've just brought this up. Okay, all right, let me rephrase the question. Okay, 1 second. You're not accepting. Let me rephrase the question. 1 second. Let me ask the question. There was a problem of independence of the Supreme Court of India when 4 judges in January had a press conference talking about how their independence is being interfered with. RBI governor then complained that his independence is autonomy is being interfered with, after which the governor resigned and now the deputy governor has also resigned. SEBI chairperson has written a letter less than a week ago saying that his independence and autonomy is being threatened at this point and he is not being allowed to function properly. CBI. I can only remind you of what happened in the CBI, between the CBI number 1 and the number 2, and how there was problems of interference in the CBI. Basically, one by one, every independent custodian of democracy in this country is being threatened. Isn't this the last piece of that puzzle, Mr. Lankar?
Excellent. D'Souza, these things raised for past 5 years before election, people has given verdict. People gave verdict very clearly. The people never believed the way in which presented all these cases, including me as a opposition person at the time.
Don't know
people
that
has given their verdict. People has given their judgment in 2019 elections. People
don't know,
are
sir.
the
One second.
ultimate.
No, one second.
People are king in democracy.
Mr.
Are you
Lankar,
undermining
Mr.
the
Lankar,
people?
no, stop that.
I don't.
No, this is a fallacy and you know it as a politician and an experienced individual. An election result does not make anything right or wrong. An election result, it means you are the elected government of the day and you have to answer questions and you have to do your job. That does not in any way condone anything you have done in the last 5 years. Now, let's be honest about this. This is how a democracy functions. I'm asking you about the pattern this government has displayed. We won an election is not an answer. I refuse to accept that. It's not a good enough answer.
No, D'Souza. There are so many people who raise the voice against the things which
And
has
you
listed
ignored
out
them.
you.
How
The
does that
people
make
have
it okay?
decided ultimately what is wrong, what is right, and the court is there to decide whatever the allegations which made by the opposition.
Okay,
There is no question of
one
ambiguity.
more question, one
Law
more
will
question,
take
one
its
more
own course of
question,
action.
Mr. Lankar. Where is the standing committee in Parliament? Where is the parliamentary standing committee? Why haven't you appointed one yet? Why are you passing bills without appointing a committee?
It is not bill first. It is amendment for the existing act, existing enactment.
Where is the committee?
That should be known to everyone.
Where is the committee?
It is the enactment which was passed with all due process in the year 2005, subject to inconsistencies. Those inconsistencies are rectified in
the
present
bill.
government.
Where is the parliamentary standing committee? Where is it? You have passed the finance bill. You are passing amendment after amendment with every day.
It is not the bill, it is the act. It is.
Let me ask the question and I'm going to ask it
is
slowly,
not
Mr.
bill,
Lankar.
it is act already which was
Mr.
passed.
Lankar,
It is amendment only the existing provisions.
Where is the parliamentary standing committee? Why haven't you appointed one?
Is there any kind of influence the fundamental functionality of the RTI? Nothing.
Where is the parliamentary
Existing
standing committee
provisions
and why
are
hasn't this
as
government
is
appointed a
continuing.
standing committee? Why is the parliament functioning without a standing
Why
committee?
it is required? Why it is
Why are you
required?
dodging my question?
Why it is required? When the objectivity is not changing, what is the requirement?
You, according to you, you believe the
When there
objectivity
is
is
no
not
change
changing.
in the object of the act, why it is required?
All right. We have one more guest who joins us right now, and I want to point out to our audience, Mr. Dinakar Lankar is completely dodging every single question I have asked him. He just repeats himself. He's given himself a verdict, which is a favourable verdict, and he's very proud of it. Anjali Bharadwaj is an RTI activist who joins us right now. Ms. Bharadwaj, thank you for joining us. This is what we've gathered so far. There has been no public consultation. There is no standing committee appointed in Parliament at all to look at this amendment. The amendment has been passed through Lok Sabha. There is no clarity on what the new rules are for the information commissioners, but the representative of the government is convinced that this will make no difference whatsoever. Your statement, please. Go ahead.
Look, the right to information law is a law which has been used extensively by people of this country. It's a law that has been owned by people, and they have used it to access information, to be able to get their basic rights and entitlements, and it's something that is fundamental in a democracy. Through this amendment bill, the government is trying to weaken the right to information law by undermining the autonomy, the independence of information commissions, which are tasked with the responsibility of making sure that the law works properly and people get information. Every year in India, about 6 million RTI applications are filed, and people are asking a lot of information, including information which is not always convenient for the government to give. So governments routinely deny information to people when they don't want to give it. What people can do under the law is go to a commission, and there they can expect justice because the commission is expected to function independently. The law as it stands today makes sure that the tenure and salaries and terms of service of information commissioners are fixed and they are at a high status so that they can function without fear or favor and make sure that people get the information that they want, and they can direct governments to give information even if that information is inconvenient for the government to share. Through the amendments, the government is trying to control these commissions. They're trying to make a caged parrot of these commissions so that they cannot give directions without worrying, without pressure. And the tenure and the salaries are being controlled now. The power to set the tenure and salaries is being usurped by the central government. So there'll always be a pressure on information commissions when they are ordering disclosure that their tenure and salaries are being fixed by the government. And that is a very regressive amendment. There has been no public consultation on this amendment. No information was made available to citizens in the public domain that these kind of amendments were being brought into this session of parliament.
Yes.
And I think that this is completely against all norms of democracy. This needed to go. First of all, we oppose the introduction of the bill in this manner, where even members of parliament said that they did not know what was there in the bill till the eve of the bill being introduced, because even they did not get a copy of the bill. And people had no idea what was being brought. So we were saying this should not be introduced. But even if it was introduced in Lok Sabha, it should have been sent to a parliamentary standing committee for discussion, debate and public consultation. And unfortunately, using brute majority, it was pushed through the Lok Sabha, and we now find it in the Rajya Sabha, where we really hope it's sent to a select committee.
All right. The truth is that the Parliamentary Standing Committee has not been appointed into Parliament right now, and that's another problem that we should get a response from the government as to why Parliament is functioning in this session without appointing a standing committee that will give its recommendations and its observations on everything that Parliament has to consider, and why there's no clarity specifically on these changes. At the end of the day, there's one thing left for us to do as citizens. If you feel strongly about this, and you should really, that this is the time to raise your voice and stand up against this. All the information is available easily on the internet. Our guests have explained it as well. Take a look at what's going on, and if you feel this is an injustice, then talk about it. Then demand that the government withdraw these changes to the RTI Act. Like I said, I don't make up your mind because someone's telling you to make up their mind. Actually read through the information, see what's going on and decide for yourself. Well, earlier in the conversation, we talked about the POCSO amendment bill that was passed in Rajya Sabha today. Well, TMC Member of Parliament, Derek O'Brien, spoke openly today in Parliament about what he believed ought to be done, where he talked about not just punishment for those who sexually abuse children, he also talked about prevention. He opened up, perhaps for the first time, and for the first time anyone's ever done in Parliament, he talked about how he was abused as a child. Derek O'Brien today shared that he was sexually abused on a bus in Kolkata when he was 13 years old. The courageous Member of Parliament urged people to talk about these experiences instead of depressing or repressing them.
All the cases today which come to light, you say some mama touch kiya, ya kaka touch kiya, that is how it happens. This is what is availability. And then what do we do? And it's for boys and girls. And what do? We are told, aisi baat mat karo. And the child actually doesn't express herself. The only reason for making this intervention is I would like and urge more people, especially in public life, if you have been sexually abused or harassed as a child, please come up and speak about it. And the more MPs who come and speak, the more actors, the more actresses, the cricketers, and the more common people. That's how more families will get encouraged to speak about this. And that's what I want to speak about today, sir, with a lot of pride and sadness and hurt. But I think India needs to know, because my family knows, that on a bus in Kolkata, as a 13-year-old, after doing tennis practice, wearing short pants and t-shirt, I got onto a crowded bus. And I don't know who it was, but with my short pants and t-shirt, I was sexually molested. In the sense, someone pressed, and I'm giving you the explicit details, sir, not to, but reason enough for someone, some unknown man, to come and ejaculate at the shots of this boy. Sir, I didn't speak about it. 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, till I brought it up once much later in my life with my parents. And that is the kind of way I urge all of us here across political parties. The Information and Broadcasting Minister is here. The minister who is bringing this bill herself has a great track record on television to reach out to people. We need to use this forum to reach out to people. The more people will talk about it, the more we start talking about it, the more children will be saved.
Well, at this point, I want to thank Derek O'Brien for his personal bravery and for setting an example, not just for those who heard him speak in Parliament today, but setting an example for families, for young boys and girls across the country. That when you are brave and you tell your story, and you tell your story often enough, your story no longer controls you. You control the story. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien, for sharing your story. Well, remember, we talked about Sudan, where ordinary citizens are standing up to the military government in the country to demand democracy. We also talked about how 100 bodies or more floated down the Nile as the government took to violence to quell those protests. Sudan might actually now have a chance of peace. The citizens and the military might agree to sign a deal that will allow power to be transferred from the latter to the former over 3 years. The talks are currently being mediated by the African Union and the UN. But there's also a great deal of interest right now from the West, from America, and from Arab Gulf countries who are worried that the Muslim Brotherhood in neighboring Egypt, from the Egypt Spring, might take control of this country using the power vacuum to their advantage. Citizens of Sudan are now waiting the finalization of that agreement, and consultations are still on between the citizen groups and the ruling military council. There is, of course, a problem. A lot of citizen groups are demanding accountability for the innocent lives that were taken earlier in the month of June. Remember, for the last 6 months, the streets of Sudan's capital have seen constant pro-democratic protests. People have put up with the shortage of food, the shortage of medicine, blackouts, power cuts, and being completely cut off phones and internet from the rest of the world. But they stood their ground, and they are now this close to perhaps making a civilian government, something that they have wanted ever since they managed to overthrow their dictator in April this year, after 30 years at the head of the state. But after the dictator was overthrown, the military took over, and now citizens want a complete democracy. Remember, this is important not just because of what's happening in Sudan and the kind of violence that we have seen. This is important because it is another nation, like I said, with a power vacuum in an area where power vacuums have led to things like ISIS in the past. Well, joining me right now to help us understand what's really going on in Sudan is a fellow journalist, Ahmed El-Zobia is with Amnesty International Research, I beg your pardon, from Sudan, joining us from Nairobi in Kenya. Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us. Good evening to you. Would you help us understand why what's happening in Sudan right now is so important for the rest of the world, and why we should be paying more attention to our brothers and sisters in Sudan?
So thank you very much for having me. And I think the protest and the resistance in Sudan should be important to anyone in the region and around the world, because this shows that grassroots resistance for any kind of dictatorship or any kind of oppression is quite important for ordinary citizens, and that was the Sudanese people been doing since December 2018, and they managed to overthrow the regime of Omar al-Bashir after 30 years, and now they are engaged in lengthy kind of negotiation with the current ruling military council to transition power from the military to the civilian.
Well, Ahmed, there's also now a question of whether or not the people in power should face charges of violence, of crimes committed against the citizens during the protests. There seems to be a difference of opinion among citizen groups at this point on whether or not those in power in the military government of Sudan should face trial for what can be perhaps described as crimes of war against their own citizens?
Well, of course, that's one of the main calls by organizations like ours, Amnesty International, and other human rights organizations inside Sudan and outside Sudan, and also by the Sudanese people themselves. Last week, for example, on the 18th of July, there's a mass protest inside the capital city, Khartoum, calling for accountability. Basically, they mean that those who are involved or implicated in the atrocities committed by the Sudanese security forces on the 3rd of June should be held accountable. And also the call for national and also international investigation of what's happened on the 3rd of June. And I think this is quite important because the issue of accountability also for transition in Sudan is quite important component of the rule of law that people hope to establish in the country.
All right, Emma Delsopia of Amnesty International joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. Many thanks for speaking with us. And this is, like you said, a story that we should all have interest in. And we should all be supporting the people of Sudan who've stood up against, in the face of horrific violence dealt by their own governments, because they demanded a democracy and they stood their ground in the face of food shortages. They were being starved, they were being cut off from the rest of the world, but they did not give up. And they're this close now to getting that democracy. But the question that needs to be answered is, will those who dealt out that violence face trials for having done those things? That brings us to the end of the Urban Debate tonight. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back again tomorrow with all of the stories from India and around the world. Good night.